For years, that family had a well-defined love. The dog was the center of the house. Walks, affection, photos, laughter. The cat was not. He was there, but no one really saw him. He slept in corners, ate after everyone else, and observed from afar a life in which he never participated. No one hated him. That would have been simpler. They just ignored him, as if he made no difference, until one night changed everything. A night of broken silence, of wrong decisions, of real danger. And it was. Precisely on that night, when the dog couldn't help, that the ignored cat did something that no one would ever expect. For a long time, that house functioned under a clear hierarchy, even though no one had ever declared it out loud. There was the beloved animal, the chosen one, the one who received immediate attention whenever he entered a room. And there was the other one. The cat was not explicitly mistreated, but he wasn't included either. His presence was tolerated, never celebrated. While the dog had his name spoken in an affectionate tone dozens of times a day, the cat responded to long silences and distracted gazes. The family believed they were doing enough. The cat had food, a place to sleep, and freedom. But no one realized that freedom without affection is just organized loneliness. The dog slept in the bedroom, participated in the routines, and followed every mood change in the house. The cat learned to move like a shadow, choosing empty times, avoiding crossing paths, existing without taking up space. He did not compete, he just accepted. As the years went by, this pattern became consolidated. The dog aged surrounded by care, the cat aged in silence. No one noticed when he stopped trying to get close. No one noticed when he began to observe more than act. The family continued to believe that everything was in order. After all, the dog was happy, and the cat never complained. But stories like this are not resolved during the day, when everything seems under control. They reveal themselves at night, when decisions need to be made quickly, when danger doesn't give warning, when that which was always ignored becomes essential. And that is exactly what happened that night. If this story has already started to grip you, leave your like now. It helps the channel continue a lot. Subscribe too, because I have a dream of reaching 1,000 subscribers, and every subscription makes a huge difference to me. And tell me in the comments, from which country are you watching this story? From the beginning, the cat's place in that house was never a question. He simply didn't have one. Not because anyone had decided that consciously, but because everything functioned automatically, almost naturally. The dog arrived first. He was welcomed with a celebration, a carefully chosen name, photos, promises. The cat came later, as an addition. He wasn't rejected at the door, but he wasn't truly invited inside either. He entered because there was physical space, not emotional space. In the early days, the cat still tried to understand the dynamics of the house. He observed the dog being called, petted, included in conversations that he didn't understand but felt. The tone was different, the energy was different. When the dog approached, people smiled. When the cat approached, they simply continued what they were doing. They didn't push him away. They didn't react. And this absence of reaction began to teach something silent. Expect nothing. The cat learned fast. He learned that there were right times to move through the house, moments when no one was paying attention. He learned that the sofa wasn't for him, the bedroom wasn't for him, the lap wasn't for him. He learned to choose neutral corners, places where he didn't bother anyone. There were no scoldings, no violence, just the daily construction of a precise invisibility. Meanwhile, the dog grew up surrounded by rituals, daily walks, new toys, veterinary care discussed with concern. The cat observed it all from afar, with a silent attention that became deeper and deeper. He didn't feel envy in the human sense. He felt understanding. He understood that choices existed and that he was not part of them. Over time, the family began to define their own identity around the dog. Photos on social media, funny stories, shared memories. The cat didn't appear in these narratives. When someone asked about him, the answer was vague. Oh, he just keeps to himself, as if that explained everything, as if it were his choice to be invisible. The cat grew up without anyone noticing. His body changed, his movements slowed down, his eyes grew sharper. He knew every sound in the house, every change in mood, every pattern of human behavior. He knew how to recognize when someone arrived home sad, when an argument was about to happen, when the dog was restless. He saw everything. No one saw him. There were moments when he tried to get closer. On calmer nights, when the dog was already sound asleep, the cat would venture closer to the people. He would press his body against them carefully, hoping for some kind of response. Sometimes he received a distracted, almost involuntary stroke. Other times he was simply ignored, as if he weren't there. Every attempt reinforced the same lesson. Do not insist. The family believed the cat was independent. Cats are like that, they said. This phrase became the perfect excuse not to look closer. Independence became synonymous with an absence of need. Silence became synonymous with contentment, and the cat, who never had a voice in that space, began to exist only as part of the scenery. The years passed this way. The dog aged, surrounded by care. The cat aged in silence. When the dog got sick, the house stopped. Consultations, medicine, sleepless nights. The cat observed everything from the corner of the room, feeling the heavy atmosphere in the air. He approached once, trying to offer his presence. He was ignored. Not out of cruelty, but out of focus. Love already had a defined recipient, and then the house began to change in subtle ways. Small tensions arose between the adults, interrupted conversations, prolonged silences. The cat noticed it all before it became explicit. He always noticed, but no one noticed that he noticed. The routine began to slowly break, and with it, the sense of security the family believed they had. The dog continued to be the center, but he could no longer fill all the voids. Still, the cat remained on the margins, observing, waiting, existing in the only way he had learned. He didn't know that something big was approaching. He didn't know that silent hierarchy would be put to the test in a brutal way. On that specific night, nothing seemed different at first. The dog slept in his usual place. The house was silent. The lights were turned off one by one. The cat settled into his corner as always. He didn't know that would be the last night everything seemed normal. Because when danger arrived, it didn't ask for permission. And when someone needed to react, it wasn't the beloved animal who noticed first. The omen did not come in the form of a dream, nor an immediate strange noise. It settled into the cat's body as a restlessness that was hard to explain. Even before night had completely fallen, something was out of place. Not visible, not audible to the humans, but perceptible to one who had spent a lifetime observing without being noticed. The cat felt minute changes. In the air, small alterations in the rhythm of the house that escaped the others. The silence of that night was not rest. It was expectation. While the family followed their usual routine, the cat walked slowly through the hallways, more attentive than normal. The dog slept soundly, exhausted after the day, ignoring everything around him. The family took comfort in this image. If the dog was calm, everything was fine. It had always worked that way. The cat observed from afar, knowing that logic had flaws no one wanted to see. When the lights began to go out one by one, the cat did not settle down immediately. Instead, he sat near the door, leading to the backyard, his body tense, his ears rigid. The wind brought different scents, mixed with something metallic and dry, almost imperceptible. It was not common. He had smelled similar things before, in other houses, in other moments of silent danger. Instinctive memory activated without asking permission. The family underestimated the cat. And for exactly this reason, because he didn't react like the dog. He didn't bark. He didn't run in circles. He didn't draw attention. His way of reacting was to observe, wait, and analyze. And that night, every second reinforced the feeling that something was wrong. The cat walked to the kitchen, then to the living room, then back to the hallway. It was a repetitive pattern, almost nervous, but too discreet to be noticed. The dog moved once, sighed, and went back to sleep. To the family, that was a proof of safety. To the cat, it was a reason for alert. The dog's silence didn't mean an absence of danger. It only meant he hadn't noticed it yet. The cat approached the place where the dog slept and stood there for a few seconds, observing. There was no rivalry in that gaze, only realization. They did not see the world the same way. Hours advanced slowly. The house plunged into a deep silence, broken only by small cracks from the cooling structure. The cat remained awake, not out of conscious anxiety, but out of instinct. He positioned himself at a strategic point in the hallway, from where he could observe the main door and the stairs. He didn't know exactly what to expect. He just felt he needed to be there. That was when the first concrete sign appeared. A low sound, almost muffled, coming from outside. It wasn't a common noise. It wasn't wind. It wasn't a small animal. The cat stood up immediately, his body rigid, his eyes fixed in the direction of the sound. He moved slowly to the door, sniffing the air. The metallic odor was stronger now. The cat backed away a few steps, not out of fear, but calculation. The sound ceased for a few minutes. The cat remained motionless, listening. The humans continued sleeping. The dog didn't move. The house seemed suspended in a fragile balance. The cat felt his heart accelerate slightly, not out of panic, but preparation. Throughout his life, he had learned that survival required anticipation. That night required it more than ever. The second sound came closer, a dry noise, almost like metal touching wood. The cat turned his head immediately. Now there was no doubt. Someone was trying to get in. He didn't understand the human concept of a break-in, but he understood a threat. His body responded automatically. He ran down the hallway, stopped near the room where the family slept, and emitted a sound unlike anything he had ever made before. It wasn't a common meow. It was a short, urgent call, strange even to him. No one woke up. The cat tried again. This time he climbed onto the bedroom door, scratching the wood with unusual force. The noise echoed in the silent hallway. Inside the room, someone moved slightly, turned over, and went back to sleep. The cat climbed down from the door and felt something he had never felt with such clarity: desperation. Not for himself, but for what was about to happen. The sound outside became more aggressive. A louder crack, followed by a long creak. The lock partially gave way. The cat ran again, now toward the living room, positioning himself behind the sofa. His eyes were fixed on the door. His entire body was on high alert. He had never been prepared to protect anyone. He had never been considered important enough for that. Yet he was there. The door opened with a low, almost careful creak. A shadow entered, then another. The cat smelled the strong scent of something that didn't belong in that house. The danger was now real, concrete, inside the space. The dog, still sleeping soundly, did not react. The cat moved silently, approaching the stairs. He needed to make enough noise to wake someone up, but he couldn't expose himself completely. He climbed a few steps and intentionally knocked over a decorative object. The sound was loud, abrupt, a dry impact against the floor. Inside the room, someone murmured something incomprehensible. The cat knocked over another object, larger this time. The noise echoed through the house. Now, footsteps moved upstairs. The cat retreated, his heart racing. In the living room, the shadows moved quickly. One of the intruders cursed in a low voice. The silent plan had been interrupted. The cat didn't understand words, but he understood the change in rhythm. The danger was reacting. He ran toward the bedroom again, scratching the door with full force now, meowing loudly, insistently, desperately. The door opened suddenly. One of the adults appeared, confused, sleepy. The cat darted between their legs and ran. Downstairs, stopping in the middle of the living room, staring fixedly at the shadows. The human followed his gaze. The moment of realization was immediate. The shock, brutal. Screams, lights being turned on in a hurry, chaotic movement. The dog finally woke up, barking loudly, running toward the living room. But now it was late. The element of surprise had been lost. The intruders fled quickly, leaving behind only the heavy silence and the sound of hearts beating too fast. The house went into a state of shock. People hugged each other, trembled, talked loudly. The dog received immediate affection, words of relief. The cat remained in the middle of the room, motionless, observing everything. He had done what no one expected. No one had asked. No one had taught him. He had simply reacted because he saw it first. For a few seconds, no one said anything about him. The focus was still on the dog, the safety, the scare. But then, someone realized that the cat was there, that it had been him. The silence changed in quality. It was no longer just relief, it was realization. And that night, which began like so many others, had crossed a point of no return. The silent hierarchy of the house had just crumbled. The silence that settled after the escape was not an ordinary silence. It was not complete relief, nor a simple absence of noise. It was a heavy silence, laden with late realization. The house was still illuminated, doors wide open, accelerated breathing echoing through. The hallways. The danger was gone, but something had been left behind, something that no one there could ignore anymore. The cat remained in the center of the room, motionless. His body was still tense, his ears rigid, his eyes alert. He didn't run in circles like the dog, he didn't seek laps, he didn't approach anyone. His reaction was different. He observed. He had always observed. And now he watched humans trying to reorganize a reality that had been broken. The dog was the first to receive attention. Trembling hands stroked him. Voices repeated his name, as if confirming his presence was a way to guarantee that everything would be all right. "Good boy," they said, even though he had woken up too late. There was no malice in this. It was habit, love trained over the years. The cat watched the scene with no visible resentment, only with the same neutrality he had learned to carry since he was small. But something had changed in the air. The humans began to realize what had actually happened. The sentences became slower, less chaotic. Someone mentioned the sound of falling objects. Another remembered the scratches on the door. A third person, still shaking, looked at the cat and spoke in a low voice, almost as if they were afraid to say it out loud. It was him. The phrase did not come as an accusation, nor as immediate praise. It came as a realization, the kind of realization that reorganizes everything one believed they knew. The cat raised his head slightly, but did not approach. He did not seek recognition. He merely confirmed to himself that the danger had passed. His function at that moment was fulfilled. The family began to reconstruct the sequence of events out loud. The strange meow, the insistent scratches, the purposeful noise, the run down the stairs. Everything made sense now. Everything pointed to a detail that had always been there but had never been taken seriously. The cat was not invisible that night. He was essential. The emotional shock came right after, not in the form of explosive guilt, but as a slow, heavy wave. One of the adults sat on the sofa, passing a hand over their face repeatedly. Another stood, staring at the floor, as if seeing years of behavior reflected there. No one said, "We were wrong," out loud. Not yet. But everyone was thinking exactly that. The cat moved a few steps away and settled near the wall. He didn't need to be in the center. He never did. Even after everything, the habit of not taking up space still spoke louder. He lay down but did not sleep. His body was exhausted, but his mind remained alert. Years of silent vigilance do not dissolve in minutes. As the early morning advanced slowly, no one could go back to sleep. The house felt different, smaller, more fragile. Every creak made someone jump. The dog, now fully awake, stayed close to the family, receiving constant attention. The cat stayed a few meters away, watching everything with attentive eyes. For the first time, however, no one told him to leave. No one pretended he wasn't there. When the sky began to lighten, exhaustion hit hard. The danger had passed, but the emotional impact remained. The family gathered in the kitchen, speaking softly, trying to understand how that night could have ended so differently. The cat entered the room with slow, cautious steps. He stopped near the door, as he always did. One of the people looked at him for longer than usual. It wasn't a quick, distracted look. It was an attentive, uncomfortable look, as if seeing something new in a familiar place. The cat held the gaze for a few seconds before looking away. Not out of fear, but habit. He still didn't know what to do with prolonged attention. Breakfast was silent. The dog got food first, as always. Then someone hesitated. They looked at the cat. They took another bowl. They put fresh food in it and pushed it toward the corner where the cat was. The gesture seemed simple, but it carried an enormous weight. It wasn't pity. It was late recognition. The cat observed the bowl for a few seconds. He approached slowly, sniffed, hesitated. Life had taught him to mistrust sudden changes. Still, he began to eat, not with voracity, but with focus. While he ate, he felt eyes upon him, not eyes of surveillance, but of reflection. He didn't understand the human meaning of it, but he felt that something had changed. Throughout the day, the house remained in a state of emotional alert. Doors were checked, locks reinforced. Conversations happened in serious tones. In all these movements, the cat was present, not at the center, but included. He wasn't kicked out of any room. He wasn't ignored when he entered the living room. Small details, almost imperceptible to those who don't know silent abandonment. For him, they were huge. At a specific moment, while someone was explaining what happened over the phone, they mentioned the cat, not as a detail, as an agent. It was the cat who noticed first. The sentence echoed through the room. The cat, lying on the floor, raised an ear. He didn't understand the words, but he recognized the tone. It was different. For the first time, they spoke about him as someone who did something, not as something that simply existed. This recognition, however, did not erase the past. The cat still moved with caution. He still chose neutral corners. He still avoided excessive approach. The night had changed the family's perception, but it couldn't erase years of invisibility in a few hours. He was still the cat who had learned not to ask. In the late afternoon, when the house finally settled, one of the people sat on the floor near the cat. They didn't try to touch him immediately. They just stayed there. The cat noticed the presence but did not move away, a small gesture, almost imperceptible. The person slowly extended a hand, stopping before touching. They waited. The cat sniffed the air, evaluated, and then remained where he was. He didn't get any closer, but he didn't run away. That simple moment carried more meaning than any speech. It was the beginning of something that had never existed in that house. Conscious choice. Not because the cat saved someone, not because he did something heroic, but because finally he was seen. And that perception was impossible to ignore now. The family spent the rest of the day dealing with the silent guilt that had settled in, not as dramatic self-punishment, but as constant discomfort. Every past gesture began to be re-evaluated, every later that never arrived, every silence interpreted as independence. The cat didn't know this, but he felt the change in the environment. The air was different, less automatic, more attentive. That night had broken something irreversible, not just the sense of security in the house, but the narrative the family told themselves. The dog was still loved. That didn't change, but the cat was no longer invisible. And this change, though late, carried deep consequences. Because, after that night, pretending he didn't exist was no longer possible, and nothing would ever be the same again. The following day brought something strange to that house. Attention. Not the impulsive, noisy attention that came only in moments of fear or joy. It was a quieter type of attention, almost uncomfortable, as if everyone were trying to remember to look at something that had always been there, but which the mind had insisted on ignoring. The family had the feeling that they had crossed an invisible line, a line that, once crossed, no longer allowed them to return to the automatism of before. The cat noticed the change immediately, as he always noticed everything. He didn't need to understand words to recognize the new rhythm. The steps were more careful, doors were closed with more attention, and, most strangely, gazes did not look away so quickly when he appeared. Before, he was part of the scenery. Now, he was noticed. This fact should have been good, but for him, it was terrifying. To be seen meant risk, it meant expectation, and expectation had always been dangerous. In the first moments, he reacted the only way he knew how, by trying to disappear. He chose the furthest corners, positioned himself behind furniture, and avoided moving around at times when people were most active. It wasn't anger or resentment, it was protection. The cat had been molded by an absence of affection for years. He had survived by learning not to take up space. There was no way to deprogram that from one day to the next. The family, in turn, began to act differently, but without knowing how. They weren't cruel people. That was the problem. Cruelty would have been obvious. What existed there was a comfortable emotional negligence, sustained by habits and simple excuses. Cats are independent. He prefers to be alone. He doesn't like affection. Phrases that served for years to avoid the real question, we chose not to look. Now, after that night, the question was alive. Inside the house. And when a question like that appears, it changes everything. The first attempt at repair came through the easiest path, food. One of the adults began to put out a better portion for the cat, at more regular times. It wasn't just the leftovers that remained. It was food intended for him. A small gesture for those who always had it, but enormous for someone who was never remembered. Still, the cat hesitated every time he approached the bowl. He would sniff for long seconds, eat slowly, and look around, as if he were waiting for someone to push him away in the middle of the meal. No one pushed him away. No one said anything. That in itself was a change so great that the cat didn't know how to process it. Then came the second gesture, space. A blanket was placed in a quiet corner of the living room, far from the dog's path. It wasn't the best place in the house, but it was a defined place, a place that seemed to be his. The family watched from afar, as if they didn't want to startle him. The cat approached, sniffed the fabric, walked around and hesitated. Life had taught him to mistrust late offers. Still, that night, when the cold arrived, he lay there for a few minutes. Then he stood up and went back to his old corner. It wasn't rejection, it was the fear of believing. The dog obviously continued to be loved. That didn't change and never would. The difference was that the love for the dog now began to expose even more the absence of love for the cat. The family began to notice uncomfortable details. The dog had toys, the cat did not. The dog had a name used with affection. The cat was called him or the cat. The dog had photos, memories, stories. The cat was an accumulated silence. This kind of perception does not generate peace, it generates guilt, and guilt, when it is not transformed into conscious action, becomes internal noise. At times, the cat seemed to feel this noise. He watched the humans talking low, looking at him, and then looking away as if they were seeing something they didn't want to face. The cat's presence was now a mirror. He did nothing. He demanded nothing. He just existed. And that was enough to remind everyone how much they had failed. The third gesture came with touch, and it was the most delicate. One of the people, perhaps the one who felt the most guilt, began to sit on the floor near the cat at specific times. They didn't try to pick him up. They didn't try to force contact. They just stayed. There, present, like someone learning to live with an ancient silence. At first the cat would move away. He would leave slowly, as if he didn't want to offend, but needed to keep his distance. The person didn't follow. They just stayed there, every day. Over time, the cat began to move away less. He didn't get closer, but he tolerated the presence. This was enormous. A real microclimax, invisible to those who don't understand the language of a forgotten animal. He was testing something new, being seen without being hurt. The family also had to deal with the practical consequence of that night. They began to reinforce the house. They installed better locks, checked windows, and talked to neighbors. This brought an unexpected side effect. The house became safer and quieter. And in this new silence, the cat began to occupy spaces he hadn't dared to before. He walked through the living room with less caution. He would jump onto low furniture without retreating immediately. He sat by the window for longer, small movements, small choices, as if he were exploring the idea that maybe now he could exist without apologizing. But there was conflict within him, because being seen also brought a new risk, losing again. The cat had no way of knowing if that attention would last, and the fear that everything would go back to normal was almost worse than remaining invisible. Invisibility he had mastered. Hope he had not. One afternoon, the cat saw the dog receive intense affection for something simple. A good boy, a laugh, a hug. The cat watched from afar. The old impulse arose. Move away, don't try, don't delude yourself. But then, something different happened. The person looked at the cat and without exaggeration, without theatricality, spoke the dog's name and then spoke a word directed at the cat. Not a name yet, but an attempt. Come here. The cat froze for an instant, not because he wanted to go, but because that phrase had never been for him. He remained motionless, looking, evaluating. The person didn't stand up, they didn't come to him. They just waited. The cat took a step, then another, and then he stopped. His body shook slightly, as if every step were a decision too heavy. In the end, he retreated and went back to the corner. But something had already changed, because he came close, because he considered it, because for a few seconds he allowed the possibility. That night, the family talked once more, not about the dog, about the cat, about how he had always been there, about how they hadn't noticed, about how that night would have been different without him. The sentence came out with an inevitable weight. He saved us. Someone corrected, with sincerity. He woke us up. It's we who have been asleep for years. The cat was in the hallway, hearing only tones, feeling only the atmosphere. He didn't understand the words, but he felt the vibration of the house change again. It was as if the family, finally, were trying to rewrite the way they looked at him, not out of pity, not just out of guilt, but out of recognition. Still, the repair had limits. The past did not disappear. The cat still carried his habits of shadow. He still preferred corners. He still started at sudden movements. The family would need to learn to respect that, and the cat would need to learn gradually that being seen does not mean being burdened. It was then that something important happened. A small household accident. Something simple. A pan forgotten on the stove, a smell of smoke beginning to spread. Nothing as dramatic as the break-in, but enough to test the new balance. The dog barked, restless, running in circles. The cat, silent, went straight to the source of the smell, as if confirming it. And when he saw the smoke, he ran upstairs and scratched the door once more. The family reacted quickly. The fire was extinguished before it grew. The scare was controlled. And in that instant, everyone realized something even deeper. It wasn't luck that night. The cat had a perception that no one respected. He always had. He just wasn't heard. This second event consolidated what the first night had initiated. The family began to understand that the cat was not just the other animal. He was a silent guardian, someone who observed when no one was looking. And suddenly, the love they had for the dog no longer seemed enough to fill the entire house. The cat's conflict, however, remained. He didn't know if this was permanent. He still didn't know if it was safe to get closer, but one thing began to form within him, the idea that maybe now he didn't need to be invisible to survive. And that was terrifying. After that night, the house never returned to being just a place of routine. Something invisible had broken, not just the sense of security, but the comfortable narrative the family maintained about themselves. For years, they believed that loving one animal was enough to consider themselves caring. Now, they understood that loving only what is easy to love leaves silent traces. The cat felt this change as an internal shift. The world around him was more attentive, more careful, but he remained the same animal molded by years of absence. He did not trust in constancy. Life had taught him that attention can disappear without warning. Even so, something inside him began to give way, slowly, like ice under a weak sun. The family decided they needed to do something concrete, not just feel guilt. It wasn't a grand decision announced out loud. It was built on small daily choices. The first step was giving the cat something he never had, a name spoken with intention. It didn't emerge immediately. There were attempts, nervous laughs, suggestions that didn't feel right. The cat watched everything from afar, as always. When they finally chose a simple name, they spoke it in a low voice, almost with apprehension. The cat did not react immediately, but the second time he heard that sound, directed at him, his ears moved. A small detail, but a definitive one. The second step was emotional space, not just allowing him to be in the rooms, but accepting him there without expectation. The family had to learn not to demand immediate reciprocity, not to charge for affection, not to expect gratitude. The cat didn't need to prove anything. He had already done more than anyone expected. This change required more from the humans than from the animal, because loving without visible return is difficult when one is used to quick responses. There were relapses, moments when someone approached too fast, forgetting that the cat still carried fear. In those moments, he retreated immediately, and the old dynamic threatened to return. But now, something was different. Instead of interpreting the retreat as rejection, the family began to interpret it as communication. They learned to stop, to respect, to wait. The dog continued to be loved intensely. This didn't change, nor did it need to. The difference was that now the love for the dog ceased to be a justification for ignoring the cat. The two coexisted in a more balanced way. The dog was noise, presence, immediate emotion. The cat was silence, observation, alert. The family began to realize that the house needed both. The true test came weeks later on an apparently ordinary night. No invasion, no smoke, just heavy rain and a power outage. The dog became agitated, barking, walking from one side to the other. The family gathered in the living room trying to calm him. The cat was there too, sitting near the wall, observing everything. In a moment of tension, one of the adults stood up too quickly, knocking something over in the dark. Everyone was startled. It was then that something simple but profound happened. Instead of hiding, the cat remained. He didn't run to the furthest corner. He didn't disappear. He stayed there, visible, in the same space as everyone else. No one commented, no one made a fuss. They simply accepted it. And that silent gesture meant more than any dramatic scene. He was choosing to remain visible. Over time, the cat began to explore the house with more confidence. He hadn't become extroverted, nor affectionate in the classic sense. But he no longer moved only as a shadow. He climbed on low furniture, sat near the window, crossed the room without sticking to the walls. Small freedoms that before seemed far too dangerous. The family watched without intervening, understanding that this progress needed to be respected. Human guilt, however, did not disappear. It transformed. Instead of paralyzing, it began to guide decisions. When someone said cats are independent, another corrected them in silence, remembering everything they had lost by believing that. The cat story became an internal lesson, not told with pride, but with humility. There was a decisive moment on a quiet afternoon. One of the adults was sitting on the floor, distracted, reading. The cat entered the room, stopped a few meters away and observed. The dog was sleeping soundly. The house was calm. The cat hesitated, took a step, then another. He approached slowly until he lay down at a short but clear distance. He didn't ask for a touch. He didn't ask for attention. He just shared the space. The person noticed but didn't move. They didn't want to break that fragile moment. They stayed like that for long minutes. The cat breathing slowly, the human respecting. No words, no exaggerated gestures, just coexistence. That was everything the cat ever needed, even without knowing how to name it. The family began to understand that love didn't need to be noisy to be real, that a silent presence also sustains, that ignoring something because it doesn't demand attention doesn't make it less important. That cat, ignored for years, had been the only one to notice the danger when it really mattered. Not because he was special in a romantic sense, but because he always observed when no one was looking. That night changed everything, but what came after was even more important. Not the heroic scene, but the slow reconstruction. Not the scare, but the responsibility. The cat didn't just save the family from that invasion. He saved them from continuing to live a comfortable lie. Today, he still prefers corners. He still moves away sometimes. He still doesn't seek out a lap. But he is no longer invisible. And that is enough. He didn't need to be the favorite. He needed to be seen. Before closing this chapter, I leave an important request. If this story touched you, leave your like now. Subscribe to the channel. I have a dream of reaching 1,000 subscribers, and every subscription makes an enormous difference. And tell me in the comments, would you have noticed this cat before that night? Some stories are not about who is loved the most, but about who is most necessary when no one is looking. This is one of them. The cat in this house was not explicitly rejected. He was forgotten in silence, placed on the margins for not demanding attention, for not making noise, for not competing for space. And that almost cost everything. That night did not turn the cat into a hero. It turned the family into someone capable of seeing. And that difference changes everything, because the problem was never the cat being silent. The problem was that no one had learned to listen to the silence. The dog continued to be loved. The cat began to be recognized, and recognition, when it arrives late, still has value. May this story serve as a reminder. Not every warning comes in the form of a bark, and not every act of care makes a noise. Sometimes, the one who truly protects is the one who observes in silence, waiting for someone to finally notice. If this story stayed with you, then it has fulfilled its purpose.